All right, everybody, let's get going here. So I just want to welcome everybody to our webinar today, Strengthening Your Manufacturing Organization Cybersecurity. My name is Rob Schenk, and I'm with Intelligent Technical Solutions, where we specialize in helping businesses thrive by managing and securing their technology. So a few housekeeping notes. This webinar will be recorded. If you'd like to review some of the information later at your convenience, or maybe share with some colleagues, happy to take questions during the webinar. I would like to make this as collaborative as possible. We'll have some time in the Q&A for this as well. If you want to go ahead and ask questions, please go ahead and use the Q&A button that you'll find in the Zoom toolbar. And we'll be able to address that either during or at the end of the webinar. All righty, so we're thrilled to have you join us for a deep dive into the world of cybersecurity and its critical role in securing manufacturers. So a couple of important notes before we get going here. You're going to notice a QR code in the top of each slide of the following slides. So there may be some folks that maybe need to drop early, and if so, be sure to claim your free security risk assessment by going ahead and scanning that code with your camera app on your phone. We'll talk more about this at the end, but this is an exclusive offer available to all live attendees today. All right, so let's get going here. I'm excited to introduce our special guests. Dan Izydorek is having some technical difficulties. We're going to go ahead and introduce Alyssa Parenteau. She's Senior Cybersecurity Advisor for Field Effect. Alyssa has over 20 years in the cybersecurity field, and she's currently focusing on helping secure businesses as they progress along their cybersecurity journeys. So Alyssa, great to have you today.
It's great to be here. I'm excited to talk about this.
Awesome. So let's talk about the focus of today's webinar. It's going to be cybersecurity for the manufacturing sector. We'll discuss what cybersecurity is, some common challenges that manufacturers often face. We'll talk about operational technology, supply chain vulnerabilities, as well as some challenges with kind of resourcing and just cyber skill shortages. And then we're going to go over some practical steps that you can take to strengthen your overall network security, steps you can take to tighten up your internal protections, and arm you with information that can spur some internal conversations depending on the status of your business. All righty, so let's get started. Alyssa, can you just maybe define cybersecurity for us and just provide us with a general overview of what it is?
Yeah, no, for sure. So when we strip everything else away, cybersecurity is about continuous risk management. So it's this process where we identify the devices, networks, and data that we use in our day-to-day business processes. And then once we identify those, we take a moment to try to understand what the risks are intrinsic to using that technology and to having access to that data. And then once we have that understanding, we're able to take actions to mitigate this risk. And this is a continuous process, right? Because we're kind of constantly bringing new devices online, we're bringing new services, right? Things change really constant. So it's about continuous risk management. And not only are we bringing in new stuff all the time, right? But just technology changes so quickly. I love the pictures we have here of like the 3.5 floppy for anybody else who's probably in our age range, Rob, or the CDs. Like just think about how your cell phone has changed. Or I notice every time I get into a car, there's this big technology bump, right, on what your car can do now. So also how we interact with technology changes quickly. So that has to be taken into consideration when we're trying to understand and mitigate those risks. Where's the newness in how we're interacting with technology? And then unfortunately, how threat actors abuse technology also changes quickly because they're also, pivoting to how the world changes. With COVID, when we had so much work from home, we saw this pivot where they were really kind of abusing that, right? And they were understanding that there was this new threat surface that they could attack. And then now with the rise of AI in the last 6 months, we're also seeing that, right? They've been really early adopters, unfortunately, of that tooling. Yeah. So what this really comes down to is that means that, cybersecurity is never done, right? It's constant. It's a constant process. So that's the takeaway, never done.
Yeah, and it's also with some clients that we've worked with and just manufacturers in general, there's a lot of them that just work with kind of just-in-time manufacturing models. So if the company goes down with the breach, there's kind of no product backlog or extra supply for the company to kind of pull from. And so even a small breach or a minimal breach can have just a huge impact. I've seen a tier 1 auto supplier that has been doing some just-in-time manufacturing for Ford Motor Company, got impacted by their security camera company, and that took down a good portion of their network, and they couldn't ship parts for several days. So the impact here is that there's fines potentially, could be tens of $1,000s, tens of thousands of dollars per hour for not being able to keep up with their needed requirements. So it's impactful situations for many in that regard.
Yeah, I think this industry is really unique for just what you were laying out there, Rob, for the degree of which even a small interruption can impact so many things, right? And that's
For
why we
sure.
have to kind of be constantly monitoring, because it's also about catching, if we can catch those things early enough, right? Because badness will happen, but if we can catch them early enough, often we can contain, right? And that means that the mitigation afterwards, or the getting back on top of things, means we'll have the least amount of effect on our systems, right? So the good news is about this risk management, though, is that you manage risk all the time, right? This is actually something we've gotten really good at, right? If you think about it, when you get into your car, right? One of the first things we do when we get in our car is we click on our seatbelt, right? We don't even think about it anymore, but we're actually taking an action to manage the risk that something might happen to us while we're in our car. And then we mitigate risks all the time within the workplace, right? I think in manufacturing, this is even more so than in your standard office environment. But think of the cameras we have, think of the access controls we have, right? So we're taking actions to mitigate the risk of somebody coming into our systems and doing something bad to those systems. We take our systems with our important data, and they're usually behind doors, right? Locked doors, locked walls. So we are doing this continuous risk management. So we can take all this knowledge we have of risk management, now just apply it to technology, right? And then cybersecurity managed well, it equals a smaller target for cyber criminals. In cybersecurity, we call this your threat surface. So the goal of this risk management is to make us the smallest possible target that we can be for those bad guys, because it's just, we were talking about the change before, it's impossible to be zero, right? It's impossible to not be a target at all. But if we can make ourselves as small a target as possible, then we're going to do better, right? We're going to help avoid most things that way.
Yeah, for sure. Very important points. We mitigate risk at the office every day, just door access, security controls. And one thing we've also seen with manufacturing companies, like just oftentimes there's kind of like some generational transition. And then during that kind of process, there's maybe differing focus on kind of risk management procedures and policies and so forth that we've seen have kind of some impact around overall kind of security protection levels that we see manufacturers taking.
No, for sure. And I think, like I said, in that sector, there's a good understanding of risk management already. We just have to take a lot of those ideas and layer them on top of the technology, the IT aspects. For sure. There's already good experience there. Yeah.
Yeah, so we've kind of looked at kind of cybersecurity from a kind of 30,000-foot view level. So maybe let's kind of focus down on manufacturers specifically.
Mhm.
You want to talk through some operational tech for on a manufacturing side?
Yeah, no, for sure. So one of the biggest areas of, I guess, of uniqueness when it comes to cybersecurity in the manufacturing sector is there's just so many OT devices, right? The SCADA stuff, the ICS stuff. So when we take our operational technology, and it's often shared with, like, it's very linear, right? It's often shared across the IT surface. So what happens is we end up with a bigger threat surface because we have all these OT devices that are now attached. And one of the issues we see sometimes is that the roles and responsibilities for who is responsible for IT cybersecurity, vice OT cybersecurity, isn't always clear. Sometimes this is all put together. Sometimes we actually see it very siloed, where there hasn't in planning been the consideration, if something happens in the OT network, can that bleed over to the IT network, or vice versa, right? Like if a secretary in the office is reading emails and ends up, clicking on a phishing email, can whatever happens to her system now affect, your whole assembly line? Can it now affect the whole OT network because of a connection there? So understanding those connections, and also who's responsible for understanding those connections, sometimes we see the lines are a bit blurred there. And it can cause that impact where we just have a bigger threat surface. That bullseye now has become bigger. And then, a lot of times with these OT systems as well, they haven't been built with security in mind, right? It's not, it's not like when they've been designed for a purpose, right? They're purposeful devices that help us manage so many things, but they haven't been designed thinking about, the bad guy who's also now going to be trying to hack onto these devices, get onto these devices. So they can be a bit more challenging to protect than some of our IT devices. So OT devices can be bad for things like having really old operating systems on them, stuff that ends up having vulnerabilities intrinsic, but they just never get updated because the device has been built to only work on this one operating system. So you don't necessarily get to patch them and patch the vulnerabilities, and then you have to try to control for a bunch of devices that could be vulnerable. And then obviously, if we do have an incident, like I said, an incident on the IT side or the OT side can end up being a doorway to the other side and affecting your whole system, having much bigger disruption to your production line. And then you had mentioned it before, Rob, where you can get behind, right? Then we have SLA issues, right? We're not getting out our products on time. And then in this environment too, right? There's potential safety issues, right? Some of our OT devices are designed with safety in mind, right? To protect people on the floor, to manage air quality, and then environmental implications, right? Like we've seen that before where there's been issues, and then that's when we have issues with pipelines, oil spills, whatnot. So there's a lot of considerations here when these two sides, the OT technology and the IT technology, are touching, right? So that's the biggest, I think, difference or the biggest uniqueness within the manufacturing realm is, and it's a big problem because finding somebody who understands how these things connect is very, very challenging because they're very different worlds, right? The OT side and the IT side.
Yeah, we've seen that with some of our manufacturing clients where they have, kind of some, specific tailor-made systems that are running, Windows 7, Windows, older versions of Windows that, the systems are just very, very expensive to go ahead and replace and update. And it's just, hey, it's not in the budget to go ahead and do that. And so, you got to create some network segmentation to kind of separate out these devices and really kind of lower the potential risk to those systems. But even then, it's like ideally you want to be kind of updating these things, but it just tends to be, a budget issue for some manufacturers over time. I need to go ahead and, create these kind of workarounds to make sure you're still protecting them to some degree.
That's a really good point, though, right? Even, it's understanding the risk, as we were saying before, right? Like once you understand the risk, you can mitigate it without necessarily, you don't always necessarily have to do the best version of the thing, right? You can, like you said, do the network segmentation. You can treat some of these systems as untrusted. So there's definitely ways that we can apply a layer of security in a cost-effective way and manage the risk in a cost-effective way, for sure. We just have to acknowledge the risk and the issues, right? So that we can take those actions, for sure.
Yeah. Got to know what you got in order to protect it.
Exactly. Right. Easier said than done.
For sure. So we've talked about some risk areas that are kind of under the direct control of a manufacturer. Now let's maybe kind of pivot a little bit and talk about third party partners, supply chain, and what's the risk to a manufacturer from these parties?
Yeah, in manufacturing, it's such a broad and deep supply chain comparative to other sectors. So what this intrinsically does is create potentially more access points for cyber attacks, right? So the more outside connections we have, the more potential doors that a threat actor has that they could kind of walk through to get onto our systems. You can think of it like that. And some of these make sense, right? Like we have third-party suppliers, we have different software, hardware, different systems coming in. So if the threat actor ends up, if there's a cyber incident at one of your suppliers, for example, and you end up bringing parts in from them, right, that ends up affecting like the whole ecosystem, right? And it wouldn't just be you, right? There could be a cyber attack that could affect many manufacturers depending on what the devices are. So we have to be aware of that, right? And we have to be trying to manage and understand the risk when we are bringing in these systems. We could do a threat risk analysis, for example, or kind of like the cybersecurity risk assessment that you guys are offering here. Like all of those tools help us to understand these risks, right? When we have these connections, because sometimes these third parties will have a need to have a direct connection to our IT networks. And then sometimes we're going to be bringing in devices, but which, depending on our network segmentation, might once again end up having direct access to our system. Last year, we also saw a jump in the type of thing where we're seeing malicious code on systems just implanted, right? In a lot of these code repositories. So depending on where the manufacturer is getting the code for their devices. There's just a lot of extra places that a bad guy can play in when we're bringing the more devices, the more systems we're bringing in externally. Made a note here, where's your data? This is an important one, because if, depending on the type of manufacturing you do, you could have IP, right? Some of your intellectual property could be at some of these third-party suppliers. So this is the data encrypted while it's there? So if that third-party supplier has some of your intellectual property and then they have a data breach, does that mean now that your IP is out there, right? Like, and at that point, it's not under your control. But what's under your control is having the conversation with the supplier and making sure that they understand your concerns and making sure that they're protecting your data in a way that you're comfortable with. I already mentioned the software and hardware vulnerabilities, and then the physical, right? If we have a lot of people coming in and out of our offices, in and out of our factories, we still see cybersecurity incidents sometimes start with a physical access, right? We still see people who walk in and will put a USB drive into a system. It still happens. It's kind of old school, but we've seen a lot of old school hacks the last year, right? We're getting the phone calls back again and that. So it's just all stuff to be aware of, right? The more people you go in and out of your system, we just have to be controlling for those risks once again. Yeah, and this all comes down to, I'll just kind of bring it back around. It's an increased threat surface. But we talked about it, I think, on the slide previously. Like, it's okay, we have to have this increased threat surface, as long as we understand it and we're taking those steps to mitigate the risk.
Yeah, a couple of points I wanted to kind of touch base on. So you talked about the third party and having conversations with them. Just one thing that we've been seeing frequently, a lot recently, is going through a vetting process for the third party to make sure that their security policies and procedures are up to appropriate levels, and making sure that you're not going to inadvertently impact manufacturer's network. We've been seeing a lot of that. The other thing that we're seeing is like some of the ramifications of not having that process occur. I mentioned earlier, one of a manufacturing client that we're aware of was penetrated from their video surveillance system, third party. Another situation that I know of, recently that ConnectWise had an issue with Screen Connect. I know of another situation where a third party that was managing a small segment of the network went ahead and got compromised themselves, and then that was the vector for entrance into that customer, and created a down level issue. So it's really making sure that the third parties are vetted and secured, because at this point it's becoming definitely a more popular vector for threat actors.
Yeah, and if you think about it, it makes sense, right? Like, if this is what you do for a living and this is your bread and butter, and you get on a system and you see an opportunity to have a greater impact across multiple targets, you're going to take it, right? That's what it comes down to. If you can make more money, if you can affect more targets and you can make more money, you're going to take it. So that is one of the reasons why we're seeing that threat vector. It's interesting because even one of the big casino hacks this year, I forget if it was the MGM one or
MGM
the Caesar.
one,
yeah, where it was a third party. They had actually picked up the phone and socially engineered the third party IT guy, right? And that's
Yep.
how they got in. So case in point, we do see this third party stuff happening a lot, and that's why we have to be aware of it, right? Because you can have everything good in your own house, but you have to make sure when other people come in and visit that they're also taking off their shoes and wiping their feet. For sure.
It's just like kind of the interconnected, nature of all the business that we do. It's just that's something that we all do these days.
For sure.
For sure. Absolutely. All righty. We've talked about, a series of issues and things to be aware of. Now the question is, okay, well, what do we do about it? Who's going to do it?
Yes, yeah, exactly. The who. And this is a tough one across the board. This isn't something right now that's unique to manufacturing. The cybersecurity skill shortage, there's been a lot of news stories about it. The reason why it impacts manufacturing just a little bit more is because of what we were talking about earlier with the complexity of the threat surface. Basically, everything we've touched upon, to find an individual, a cybersecurity specialist who has a good understanding of the IT issues, has a good understanding of the OT issues, and has a good understanding of supply chain issues. It's like you're looking for a cybersecurity unicorn, right? It's like a mythical creature that may or may not exist. So the fact that it's such a unique individual that would be able to handle all these issues, that's why it's affecting manufacturing a bit more. And the other side that we see the resource shortage kind of affecting is in that incident response preparation, right? This sector seems to be really, really good with like business continuity planning, right? There's a really firm understanding of what downtime means, right? There's a really good understanding of what a disruption in production means in a kind of like a classical sense. But we don't see as much like incident response planning for the IT side. So what does that mean? That means if a cybersecurity incident does happen, we see more downtime, right? Because the preparation has been put in place, the planning's not in place, planning hasn't been tested, and the first time that you start thinking about these things, you don't want it to be when you're in the thick of an incident, right? Um, and then, like I said before, when you have that, if you don't have that person that understands these different sectors, then you get issues with improper vulnerability management, right? It's hard to manage all those risks if we don't fundamentally understand them. What we usually suggest is, it's much more cost effective to kind of offset this, right? To bring in cybersecurity specialists to do like the risk assessment that you guys are doing today. It just the cost of trying to get a person that can do all these things and bring them in is in this right now, it's very cost prohibitive. But there are, once again, ways around that. You can just bring in specialists. We suggest working with people who have already worked with manufacturing sector, right? And people who understand the particular issues, like all the stuff that we've outlined today. And that's going to be kind of your best bet moving forward to help rectify some of the issues with the skill shortage and still get the attention you need.
For sure. Excellent. Alrighty. So the focus of so far has been to kind of like share the realities of cyber risks that manufacturers are facing. So, not here to fearmonger, just, keep everybody informed about what's going on. So we wanted to kind of share, what are things that, practical things that people can do, positive steps that you can take that will, dramatically or hopefully significantly, minimize an organization's risk. So maybe we can kind of go over some of these steps to kind of help ultimately, sleep better at night and make sure that you're not taken down by a cyber criminal. So with that said, Alyssa, what are some things that we can be doing to improve?
For sure. In cybersecurity, we have this concept of the three pillars of cybersecurity. We call them people, processes, and technology. And it's really just a framework for thinking about this, for thinking about these steps we can take. So we'll go through each one individually. So first, let's look at people. So the biggest thing that you can do is cyber risk awareness, right? Educational pieces. Actually being here today, right? People who are trying to educate themselves on the particular risks that they're going to face within this sector. That's a great first step. Having an onboarding process with your employees where you help them understand those risks, like you help the people working in the office understand about the phishing risks that they might come across in the sector, making sure you're almost like demystifying that idea that it could happen to anyone. So let's be prepared, like have a general awareness of this, and then creating a cybersecurity culture at work. That's all part of this as well, right? The big thing there is having a cybersecurity leader. We really, really recommend that somebody at work wears that hat. And this doesn't have to be even an IT person. Sometimes in the smaller companies we work with, that person wears a lot of different hats. But it's about showing everybody else in the organization that you're taking cybersecurity seriously. They know who to call if they have a question or something's going on. And then once again, you're just kind of normalizing cybersecurity and normalizing the idea that there could be an incident, right? Because what you don't want is somebody to be in a situation where they've gotten an email that maybe looks a bit suspicious, but they just, they go against that gut feeling they have that something could be off because you haven't been talking about it, right? And that's the biggest thing. Talk about it, constantly talk about it, frequent, engaging, actionable security training. And across all levels and departments, we do sometimes see gaps where they tend to push all the training at the working level, but then, they'll leave the big fish up here that end up getting targeted more a lot of the time, right? But at the end of the day, we want to empower our employees to make good decisions in bad situations. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, I can concur with a lot of the stuff you've said. We've implemented a lot of security awareness training programs across our client base, and the ones that are most successful, executive buy-in starts from the top. Leaders got to lead, set the example. gamifying, I think also kind of creates kind of an environment, creating this culture of trust that,
Yes.
if someone sees something, that they'll go ahead and, tell people, spread
Yeah.
the word, and really kind of getting the word out there and kind of changing, like you said, creating like a security first mindset,
Yes.
security first culture that, I think can really kind of lower it. Because I mean, at the end of the day, the workers are the kind of the front lines, right? They're just, they're seeing the phishing attempts and so forth, and arming them with information to be able to recognize the telltale signs is super impactful and can really reduce a company's risk.
Yeah, no, for sure. You want to give them the space to be able to make a good decision.
Cool.
Yeah. So next up, we'd like to talk about processes. So this is a big one. This is a bit of a heavy lift, and we understand that. But the big thing here is we want to design and implement a cybersecurity strategy. So what is that? That's the accumulation of kind of everything we've talked about today, right? It's understanding the devices, networks, and data that we use. It's capturing all those risks that come with that use that we were talking about. And then not only taking actions, but then making sure we're documenting the actions and that we understand that residual risk. Because, as we mentioned before, that target's never going to be zero. So as long as we understand that, and I've documented in some way that other people in the company, know where it is and can look at it too. So we have that general understanding. And then this also comes down to the development of frameworks and procedures. So maybe this includes something like a password creation and management policy. Maybe this includes an acceptable use policy. And this all kind of, as you can see, right, it's all attached, right? The people, the processes, the technology, because this gets back to informing your people again. When you have good processes in place and good policies and your people are aware of them, all these things start working together and they start working together for you. It is important to say that no one size fits all. Uh, companies can look so different from how much they manage on site to how much is cloud based to if they have OT and IT. There's a lot. No one company really feels the same at this point. There's such diversity. So this is going to look different depending on what you have at your house. But a cybersecurity risk assessment like the one you guys are offering, Rob, is super helpful here because then you have a subject matter expert that can help kind of guide you along that way, help you figure out where your gaps are, help you figure out how to document this in a way that works for you.
Yeah. I mean, in order to like manage your risk, you got to know what you got, you
Yeah.
got to just it's just kind of, you start from the basic, right? Just understand what you have in your environment, clearly document it, create that list, get that risk assessment to understand where your current risks are, and then you go ahead and prioritize from there and lower overall risk as you go on.
Exactly. Actually, you hit on something important there, Rob. Prioritization. Because none of us have an infinite amount of money. So also being able to have somebody help you understand where your highest risk is and how to prioritize that first over the nice to haves is a really important step there as well, right? The prioritization of investment is huge. So last but not least, we want to cover the technology side. Obviously, we're talking about technology a lot today, and it has a very big part to play. We always encourage where you can solve the problem with technology. That way you get automated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week vulnerability management. That's, you have a tool working for you, right? Use the right tool for the job. Continuous monitoring is what we suggest here because you get early detection. That idea that if something does get through, it'll get detected quickly, contained, and then the effect on our systems, the potential downtime is lessened, right? The quicker that we can respond to something. And the only way to really respond to that is if we have these technology, right? The managed detection response systems that are helping us understand where our vulnerabilities are, helping us to patch those systems, and also just blocking threats from getting to our people, right? Because there's other technology there, email filtering. We've been talking about the phishing campaigns quite a bit, but there's DNS firewalls as well, penetration testing so that we can find those vulnerabilities before the bad guys find them for us, right? We can get the good guys looking for those. And this really comes down to an appropriate mix of in-house security, right? Leveraging our IT people in-house who have a good understanding of our system, and then the outsourced managed services. Once again, this is going to look different for different companies. How much is inside device, how much is outside. Work with your managed service provider there to help you figure out, what that Goldilocks point is for you. But at the end of the day, technology is is the thing that hurts us here, but it's also the thing that ultimately can save us, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, I think the other part is just like with the MDR, just having visibility across the varying domains of threat. There's, I see a lot of companies that are just kind of focusing more on the kind of the endpoint and server, but they're kind of don't have visibility over kind of network infrastructure, network devices. And then, we have a huge amount of like cloud applications and SaaS apps that
yeah,
also contain a lot of confidential information that oftentimes aren't monitored.
yeah.
So having a kind of a holistic view over that entire ecosystem, I think goes a long way towards reducing overall company risk.
That's a really good point, especially when you have a lot of like OT infrastructure that sometimes there's not actually, systems or technology that can monitor those systems on the systems themselves, right? We don't often have little endpoint systems for those, but we can see a lot with the network sensors. So that's a really good point, Rob, having that holistic, whatever devices, networks, and data you have, we have to be considering all three of these things all the time. Yeah, because if not, you're going to have a blind spot, and that inevitably might be where they get in. So really good points, Rob. No, it's really good point.
Alrighty, so our job is not to leave you here in stress. So right now, there's a couple of 3 steps that you can take to go ahead and protect your organization. First step is to just get a third-party risk assessment, and we highly recommend it being a third-party risk assessment. Ideally, we're not proofreading our own work. So this will tell you where your system is lacking, are your systems being backed up, what's your vulnerability to ransomware, what are your risks, and kind of what needs to be done. And step 2 is to get a remediation plan in together. Once you've gone ahead and had the risk assessment, get your list of remediations that you want to go ahead and go through. And then, like we were talking about earlier about the importance of prioritizing these. There's going to be some that you're going to want to get done right away. And there's going to be some that are maybe more structural and take a little bit more time. You have to there's maybe some budget considerations. And then third step is to test again, and have it be kind of a regular cadence because things change. The systems are getting updated over time. You want to make sure that you're capturing any risk that may be added into the infrastructure that maybe isn't known. So to that end, we're offering for attendees a free risk assessment. So if you go ahead and scan that QR code, it'll take you to another page. You go ahead and put in some basic information about your company, and then we'll go ahead and work with you to go ahead and do a confidential risk assessment and let you know exactly where you're at. And this will include a kind of a dark web assessment. What credentials do you happen to have on the dark web that may be unbeknownst to you? There's no obligation, and we just want to make sure that we offer this to go ahead and just create awareness around what's going on within infrastructures. Alrighty, so with that being said, let's transition to Q&A. We had a couple of Q&A questions. Let's see, intellectual property issues are a driver for CMMC 2.0 and supply chain security. Weakest link in the supply chain is more likely to be targeted. I guess any comments on that, Alyssa?
Yeah, no, the data overall, so when we talk about CMMC, it also makes me think of all the other compliance frameworks and the regulatory issues as well, right? So when it comes not just to intellectual property, but other data, I think one of the things that comment highlights is it's really important to understand, depending on the type of data that we house, what are the implications from a compliance or regulatory framework as well? Because yes, if you do want to be working within the CMMC realm, right? If we want to be doing that government bidding, we do have to be aware of, what the ramifications are if we lose that intellectual property, right? And not only if we've lost it, but we haven't shown due diligence in how we protected it. So this gets back once again to understanding the risk based on the type. So, but that was a really good point to bring up. It's not just risk intrinsic to the data, right? Like if I lose my IP, it's going to hurt my company no matter what. But if I've also bid on a government contract and said that I'm CMMC compliant and then lose that IP, and now it's, connected upstream to some sort of government infrastructure, things have just gotten a lot worse for me. Right.
Sure.
Yeah. So 100%, I think that's good. It highlights, be aware of not just your contractual obligations, not just your SLAs, but also, your obligations when it comes to those compliance frameworks. And because there can be very huge fines, and then also internationally, right? We have the GDPR. So depending on where you're bidding or where your products are going out to, and Canada soon actually is, there's a bill being passed where they're going to have more hefty fines as well. So depending on how international your manufacturing is as well, you need to be aware of all those.
Thank you for that. One question, can your incident response plan just be part of your business continuity plan?
Yeah, that's a great question. It certainly can. I think it depends on a lot of things. It depends on the size of your organization, the complexity of your network. I've seen many different iterations of incident response plans, business continuity plans, DR, disaster recovery plans. So I've seen many different types of plans, and I've seen them named many different things. I think the biggest thing there is however you decide to organize the data, it's important to test it. We really suggest doing some sort of tabletop exercise, and it could be very, very simple. It could even just be you walking through, okay, so somebody has clicked on an email, like what do we do next? If you do decide to separate these things, it's really good to have playbooks in play, right? So have that, have a sort of flow chart that we can follow, and once again, test it. So at the end of the day, however it works for you to organize that data, that's what'll work best, but just make sure that you test it. And then as you test it, if you find like that the way the information's organized, if it's all in one and it's too confusing, it's too hard for people to get through, just make those changes as you go and test again. The best disaster recovery and incident response plans are tested, and they're tested at least yearly. So that would be my big takeaway is it can look and be many different things, but test it and figure out what works for you and your organization.
Totally. We have another question here. Any recommendations on how to approach and improve a security culture with such different mindsets between manufacturing, OT employees versus more typical administrative or IT employees?
That is such a great question. That's such a good question. And it's hard. I'll be honest that it is hard. It's hard to create something that resonates across the board. The one thing that I would suggest, and Rob, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this too, is buy-in. You need to get buy-in from all the different parties. People don't necessarily like being talked at, right? We don't like to be forced to do training. We don't like to be told what to do. It's kind of human nature. But if you can figure out, a way to have buy-in, so whether that comes down to soliciting your employees for what they would like to see from a cybersecurity program or what they're most concerned about. If you involve them in the conversation in all different sections, we do find that you get a lot more buy-in. And the other thing too is if you give people a reason, like a reason why. So if you just put out a company-wide email and say, tomorrow everybody has to use multi-factor authentication, but you just don't take the moment to say, and this is why. Microsoft has come out and said that like 98% of the Office 365 compromises could have actually been prevented if they had multi-factor authentication. And so we think this is a great idea and appreciate everybody's help with this. Taking those moments to create the buy-in. So ask the questions from your people to help create the buy-in, no matter whether they're OT or IT. Give everybody like a part to play, and then provide explanations. I find that those two things can really, really go a long way, but it will be a bit difficult to find something that resonates across the board, but it's very helpful to bring them in, make them part of the process.
Yeah, we've seen, kind of just to add on, we evaluated multiple kind of security awareness training programs, and we've seen success with certain types. One is like just really engaging content, kind of more story-based. I think that more kind of resonates probably with more of the kind of administrative or just kind of like office worker types. It's having a bit more kind of like engaging storytelling kind of things. We've also seen kind of, people's attention spans are kind of getting smaller and shorter, right? So having kind of more snippets of information When one program gives kind of like a weekly kind of like tip of the week kind of thing that has an associated quiz with it, kind of smaller bites, digestible bites. That has gotten pretty good feedback. But I would say like really engaging story-based content, and smaller form factor or smaller, kind of a shorter type of content to kind of address attention span that's more regular, maybe. Those are kind of things that we've gotten good feedback on. But yeah, definitely a great question. All righty. I guess any other questions? We'll give it a second here, and then otherwise we'll let everybody get back to their day. And I guess with that, Alyssa, thank you for your time. Appreciate the knowledge share and great information presented today. And thank you. Everyone have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.